The story opens in a near-empty office, late in the evening. The young narrator sits at his desk, the only real sound the low hum of his laptop fan and the occasional flicker from a fluorescent light overhead. Papers are scattered in organized chaos, a coffee cup half drained and forgotten at his side. He's tired, but focused, pushing himself harder than he should, chasing the idea that staying late will prove his worth. Then he hears it, the soft echo of heels in the hallway. A sound that instantly changes the air around him. Without looking up, he already knows who it is. She has a presence that lingers before she even speaks, something in the rhythm of her footsteps that always feels deliberate, assured. When she enters the room, the lighting seems to soften around her. She doesn't storm in, she arrives with a quiet grace, like she's both part of this world and somehow separate from it. The narrator notices details he never says aloud, the way her tailored blouse fits her shoulders, the slight silver strands woven into her otherwise dark hair, and the calm authority in her expression. She's his boss, yes, but more than that, she's someone who carries herself like every space bends a little to her gravity. She doesn't speak right away. Instead, she comes up behind his chair, standing just close enough that he feels the shift in the air. The faint scent of her perfume drifts toward him, warm, subtle, not sweet but sophisticated. His shoulders tense without meaning to. Her hand comes to rest lightly on the back of his chair. Not in a personal way, not yet, but enough to ground him in her presence. It's a reminder, she's watching, and she's near. He tells himself to keep typing, to stay absorbed in the numbers on the screen, but it's impossible. Every keystroke feels louder, every breath shorter. He can sense her eyes on his laptop, following the lines of his work, and suddenly he's painfully aware of every little flaw in what he's doing. When she finally speaks, her voice is low, calm, but carries that unmistakable weight of command, "You're still here." It isn't really a question. It's an observation, tinged with something unreadable. Concern. Irritation. Or maybe something else altogether. The narrator forces a small laugh, glancing up at her only briefly. But when he does, her gaze meets his directly, steady and unwavering. For a moment, the office feels too warm, too close. That single exchange, her hand on his chair, her voice low and even, her gaze locked with his, sets the tone. There's authority, yes, but also something quieter beneath it. A tension he can't quite name. The keynote closes with him realizing that, though he thought he stayed late for the sake of his work, he may have been staying for another reason altogether, one he isn't ready to admit. The silence stretches between them after her first words. He tells himself to return to his screen, to look busy, but his focus is fractured, caught between the steady glow of the laptop and the weight of her presence beside him. Then, without warning, her voice cuts through the stillness. Calm. Low. Firm. Shut that laptop. The words aren't harsh, but they leave no room for argument. They hang in the air like a sudden gust of wind, shifting everything in the room. His fingers hover above the keyboard, frozen. It's such a small request, and yet it feels enormous. He hesitates, not because he wants to disobey, but because he doesn't understand. Why stop him now, when he's been working late for weeks without comment? Why this moment, this night? The glow of the screen suddenly feels intrusive, almost inappropriate under the intensity of her gaze. Slowly, deliberately, he lowers the lid. The click of the laptop snapping shut echoes louder than it should, filling the quiet office like a closing door. And with that sound, the world shifts. Work no longer stands between them. There is nothing to shield him now, no glowing screen to hide behind, no excuses to keep the conversation safe. He feels her watching him, and when he finally lifts his eyes, her expression is unreadable. It isn't the sharp look of a boss catching an employee out of line, nor the detached glance of someone simply making conversation. It's steadier than that, softer yet more demanding at the same time. The office suddenly feels warmer, smaller, as though the walls themselves are leaning in. He notices the faint reflection of the two of them in the darkened window, her standing tall, poised, and him seated beneath her gaze. The imbalance is striking, and it stirs something inside him he doesn't want to name. His throat feels dry, so he forces out a half-smile. Was I being too loud? He tries, his voice meant to be casual but landing softer, more vulnerable. She doesn't return the smile. Instead, she tilts her head just slightly, studying him. The kind of look that makes him feel both exposed and seen. "You've done enough for tonight," she says. But there's a weight behind the words, something beyond work. Something that suggests she isn't talking about spreadsheets or deadlines. The silence that follows is heavy, but not uncomfortable. It lingers, stretching, daring one of them to break it. He can feel his pulse in his throat, in his fingertips still resting on the cool surface of the closed laptop. Her hand lifts from the back of his chair at last, and the absence of her touch sends a strange pang through him. She steps around to the other side of the desk, closer now, her presence impossible to ignore. What unsettles him most isn't her authority, he's used to that, but the softness beneath it. The quiet command that seems less about control and more about attention. About him. And though he doesn't say it, though he barely lets himself think it, he realizes this is the first time she has ever asked him for something that wasn't about the job. With the laptop closed, there is no longer the buffer of work between them. The narrator sits with his hands folded loosely, unsure of where to place his focus. She lingers on the other side of the desk, her body angled toward him, her eyes no longer fixed on spreadsheets or numbers, but on him. Her voice is softer now, less commanding. "You've been here a lot lately," she says. It isn't criticism. It's observation, laced with curiosity. He shrugs, forcing a small laugh. "Guess I just want to keep up." It's the safe answer, the professional one. But she doesn't let it rest. Instead, she leans her hip against the desk, her arms folding across her chest in a gesture that looks protective rather than stern. "And what exactly are you keeping up with?" she presses, eyes narrowing slightly, though not unkindly. The question lingers. He knows she's not asking about deadlines. She's asking about him, why he pushes himself, why he hides in late-night hours instead of going home. The thought unsettles him, because he's never had to explain that part of himself before, least of all to her. To ease the weight of her attention, he shifts the focus back. "You stay late too," he says quietly. "More than anyone else here." For the first time that night, something flickers across her face, not irritation, but something almost like surprise. Then she smiles, faintly, though it doesn't quite reach her eyes. "Old habits," she admits. "When you're used to carrying everything, it's hard to put it down." He notices the way her fingers play absently with the rim of her coffee mug as she speaks, as though grounding herself in the movement. The gesture is small, but it makes her seem less untouchable, more human. He finds himself watching the delicate lines of her hand, the way the light catches her skin. Encouraged by her openness, he asks, "Does it ever get easier?" She lets out a low breath that could almost be a laugh. "No. You just get better at hiding how tired you are." Her voice softens at the end, her eyes drifting toward the dark window. For a moment, she isn't the untouchable boss, she's a woman admitting something private, something unguarded. He feels a pull in his chest at the honesty of it, a quiet ache. He wants to tell her that he notices the weariness in her, even when she thinks no one does. He wants to tell her she doesn't have to carry it alone. But the words catch in his throat, too bold for this fragile moment. Instead, he simply nods, his silence saying what he cannot. She glances back at him then, her expression softening, and he swears the room feels warmer for it. The distance between them, in age, in status, in everything, doesn't vanish, but it bends. For the first time, he sees not just his boss, but a woman standing in front of him, letting him see the cracks in her armor. And it makes him wonder what would happen if he reached further into that quiet space she's just opened. The conversation trails into a silence that is neither awkward nor empty. It's the kind of pause that hums with unspoken meaning, where words feel unnecessary because the air itself seems charged. She hasn't moved far, still leaning lightly against the desk, her gaze lowered to the mug in her hand. The office around them has gone quiet, the building settling into its after-hours hush. The only light comes from the desk lamp between them, throwing a soft glow that seems to isolate the two of them from the rest of the world. He tries to look away, to busy himself with something ordinary, but his eyes return to her almost involuntarily. There's something magnetic about the way she holds herself, graceful but tired, composed but vulnerable. And for the first time, he realizes how close they are. Close enough that he can see the faint sheen of weariness in her eyes, the small curve of her lips when she exhales as if letting go of a thought she doesn't want to say aloud. Her knee shifts slightly beneath the desk, just enough that it almost grazes his. He tells himself it's accidental, but the jolt of awareness it sends through him is undeniable. He doesn't pull back, and neither does she. The silence deepens. He feels it in his chest, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat rising against the stillness. Every small sound, the creak of the chair, the soft clink of her mug being set aside, becomes amplified, like they're both tuned to the same frequency now. Then, it happens. A strand of her hair slips loose from behind her ear, falling forward to brush her cheek. The movement is so natural, so unremarkable, and yet it undoes him. Before he can think better of it, his hand twitches upward, fingers reaching across the narrow space between them. He's so close he can feel the warmth radiating from her skin. But at the last moment, he freezes. Inches from touching her, his hand hovers in the air, suspended between impulse and restraint. His breath catches. To actually brush her hair back would mean crossing a line, one neither of them has acknowledged, though it looms in the air like a boundary both long to test. She notices. Of course she does. Her eyes flick toward his raised hand, then back to his face. For a heartbeat, she doesn't move, doesn't speak. The tension in her gaze tells him she knows exactly what almost happened. And then, with a slight, deliberate tilt of her head, she lets the strand of hair remain where it is, as though silently daring him to finish what he started. But he doesn't. His hand falls back to the desk, his fingers curling against the wood to keep them still. The air between them feels heavier now, weighted with what almost was. Neither mentions it. Neither needs to. The unspoken lingers, more powerful than if he had actually touched her. In that moment, he understands that their connection is no longer something imagined. It's real. Tangible. And it's only getting harder to ignore. The silence between them stretches again, heavier now after what almost happened. The air feels thick, like even the smallest movement might tip the balance one way or another. He forces himself to breathe evenly, to calm the quickened rhythm in his chest. She breaks the quiet first. Not with authority this time, not with a directive or an order, but with a sigh, soft and unguarded. Her voice follows, quieter than before. I work too much. The words surprise him, not because they aren't true, but because of the way she says them. Not as an excuse, not as a boast, but as an admission. She shifts slightly on the desk, her arms unfolding, hands now resting in her lap. Her fingers toy absent-mindedly with the edge of her sleeve as she continues. I stay here because it's easier than going home to silence. Easier than trying to figure out what else I should be doing with myself. Her tone carries no drama, just honesty. And for the first time, he sees her not as the composed figure who commands every room, but as a woman who hides her loneliness in late-night hours. He swallows hard, unsure if he should respond. But the openness in her voice pulls something out of him, something he's been holding back too. Maybe I do the same, he admits quietly. I tell myself it's about ambition, about proving myself. But really, he hesitates, his eyes lowering briefly before meeting hers again. Really, I think I just don't want to feel left behind. Her gaze softens. The faintest smile touches her lips, not of amusement but of recognition. So we're both hiding here, she says, almost to herself. The words settle between them, gentle but weighted. Two people from different places in life, discovering they've been escaping into the same shadows. Almost without thinking, she shifts closer. Her hand moves toward his, hesitant at first, as though testing the air. Then, lightly, her fingers rest over his. Not a bold gesture, not a deliberate crossing of boundaries, but a quiet acknowledgement. The touch is brief, delicate, but it sends a rush through him. The warmth of her skin against his hand is subtle, yet it anchors him in a way nothing else could. His breath stirs, unsteady. He doesn't grip her hand, doesn't dare, he simply lets the moment exist, memorizing every detail. Then, slowly, she withdraws, folding her hands back into her lap. The absence of her touch leaves his skin tingling, as though the imprint remains even without her there. He wants to say something, to tell her how much that brief contact meant, how much he wants it again. But he doesn't. Instead, he sits quietly, the truth pulsing unspoken between them. For the first time, he feels certain that she knows. That she felt the same rush he did, even if she won't admit it aloud. And though the room falls silent again, it is no longer the silence of strangers. It is the silence of two people on the edge of something they can't quite name, but neither can deny. The clock ticks softly on the wall, though neither of them pays it any mind. The office feels sealed away from time itself, wrapped in the hush of the late hour. He sits back slightly, as if to ease the tension that's been rising between them, but the space doesn't widen, not really. Every movement only seems to draw their focus more keenly onto each other. She rises from the desk, slow and unhurried, as though she's been considering it for a while. Her steps are soundless against the carpet, her presence pulling the room's gravity with her. She doesn't go far, only a few feet toward the window, where the city lights scatter across the glass in soft reflections. He follows her with his eyes, the steady rhythm of her movements pulling him in. When she speaks, it's almost to the window, almost to herself. You can lose yourself in work without realizing it. One day you look up, and years have gone by. Her voice is quiet, carrying both strength and regret. He hears not just advice but confession, the subtle ache of someone who has lived exactly what she's describing. He stands too, slowly, as though drawn to her without conscious thought. The distance between them shrinks, and soon he's at her side, shoulder nearly brushing hers as they both face the window. Their reflections hover together in the glass, her elegant posture softened by weariness, his younger frame steady but hesitant. For a long moment, they say nothing. The silence is thicker than before, charged, intimate. He can feel the warmth of her presence seeping through the small gap between them. His pulse climbs, quick and insistent, as if urging him forward. Then, subtly, she turns her head toward him. The faintest brush of her breath touches his cheek, warm, delicate, almost a whisper of contact. His eyes find hers, and for a suspended instant the world narrows down to that gaze, that closeness, that fragile thread binding them together. Every instinct in him leans forward, every fiber of his being wanting to close the distance. His hand twitches at his side, aching to rise, to touch her arm, her hand, anything to confirm the connection burning between them. But he holds back. The restraint is almost painful, yet it feels necessary. To move too quickly would shatter the delicate balance, the fragile trust that has been building moment by moment. Her eyes linger on his, steady and searching, as if she too is weighing the same impossible choice. Then, in the barest whisper, she says, "Don't lose yourself in this place, not when I'm here." The words wash over him, gentle yet laden with meaning. More than advice. More than guidance. They are an invitation, a confession wrapped in careful restraint. The moment hangs, stretched to breaking, then softly dissolves as she looks back toward the city lights. The distance remains, unbroken, unacted upon, but everything has changed. He knows now how close they came. And he knows, with absolute certainty, that they will come close again. The hum of the city outside filters faintly through the office windows, but in here the world feels still, suspended. He remains at her side for a few moments longer, both of them staring at the glowing skyline as though it holds answers neither can put into words. Finally, she exhales, a soft sound that carries both relief and reluctance. Then she turns toward him, her expression steadier now, more composed, though not distant. The woman who commands boardrooms and meetings is returning, but there's a softness in her eyes that wasn't there before. "It's late," she says gently, her voice carrying no hint of dismissal, only quiet care. "You should go home. Rest." He nods, but doesn't immediately move. His body feels reluctant to break the fragile connection they've built in this quiet hour. He searches her gaze, trying to memorize the subtle tenderness there, the way her features, usually so guarded, have softened into something almost vulnerable. She seems to notice his hesitation. And instead of stepping back, she takes one small step closer. Her hand lifts, almost tentatively, and comes to rest against his forearm. The touch is light, but unmistakable. Warmth spreads through him at once, his skin alive under her fingers. "You've done enough for tonight," she adds, her thumb brushing the fabric of his sleeve in a gesture that feels unpracticed, almost hesitant. "Don't carry more than you need to." He swallows hard, his heart pulling him to say something, anything, that might capture what this moment means to him. But the words that come are simple, raw. "I don't mind carrying it, if it's with you." For a heartbeat, silence answers him. Her eyes soften further, her lips parting as though she might respond, then pressing together again. Instead of speaking, she lets her hand linger on his arm a moment longer, the faintest pressure of her fingers communicating more than words could. Finally, she withdraws, and he feels the loss like a cool draft where her warmth had been. She steps back, reclaiming a touch of the composure she wears like armor, though it doesn't quite hide the gentleness beneath. She walks him to the door, the sound of her heels soft against the carpet. When they reach it, he pauses, turning to her one last time. The distance between them now feels charged but different, no longer uncertain, but waiting. Her gaze holds his steadily. Then, just before he steps into the hall, she reaches out once more, letting her hand rest briefly against his arm again, lighter than before. "Good night," she says, her voice warm, carrying a promise unspoken. He nods, offering a quiet smile, and steps into the empty hallway. The door clicks shut behind him, but her presence lingers, in the warmth of his skin where she touched him, in the echo of her voice, in the memory of her breath so close to his cheek. As he walks away, he realizes that what passed between them tonight wasn't just about work, or comfort, or even loneliness. It was something more. Something fragile, unspoken, and yet undeniable. And though nothing happened outright, everything has changed.